Hearing about your extraordinary life as a person who studies anxiety and resilience against anxiety, one of the things that I've just been thinking a lot about is, what must your experience of anxiety be like in these extreme environments? Do you experience anxiety the same way, or do other things make you anxious and not those things? And I just wondered if you could
the latter. That's a great question, and so I think risk management has everything to do with mastery. So the things that we really know, we really understand, the things that we've really trained for don't frighten us. In fact, when I go out on a spacewalk, I know every circuit in that spacesuit, how the plumbing works, how the communication system works, how things might fail inside the suit, and what I would do if that were to break, and what the next step would be, cascading failures along the way. So when I'm in a spacesuit, it feels like a second skin to me. So I'm very, very comfortable. Certainly things that we do outside are not always predictable. Things can be very hard and challenging and dangerous, but we tend not to focus on the things that we can't control, but just try and focus on the things that we can do to make the best of the situation. And I just had a conversation with a friend of mine, Bill, who's a caver, and these spelunkers are folks that go into the bowels of the earth. For this, Bill has explored the world's deepest caves, and he goes in for weeks at a time. And for me, that is just the most frightening, terrifying thing I can possibly imagine. It's just you're climbing in the dark, and then the fact that the water table can rise or there can be a flood, and he's had life experiences where he's concluded that I'm going to die. The water is rushing in, and that to me is just something that I can't even fathom. And
you like high places.
I like high, lofty places where I can see where I'm going. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So you talk about control, and in the case of being in a spacesuit, you know that there's a backup to the backup to the backup.
Right.
But yet, of course, you still can't. There are so many unexpected things in space. So it's a matter of focus.
It's focus and also training and preparation. So one of the things that I'm most proud of, actually, as an astronaut, is the creation of a program we called the EVA Skills Training Program. We had, this incredible space station that we had to build, and the most complex assembly in space ever. We needed to do hundreds of spacewalks. And at the time, we only had about 10 people who were fully certified to do any kind of spacewalk. And we had an astronaut office of 140 people. We needed to get more people fully certified. And so what we decided to do is create this program where we define what the gold level standard of performance was, and then gave people enough time in the training pool that we use. It's the world's largest pool, 40 feet deep, 100 feet wide, 200 feet in length, and we have a full mock-up of the International Space Station and the shuttle. And we allow people to really understand the mechanics of working in 3 dimensions. We call it 6 degrees of freedom, moving in X, Y, Z, and then pitch, yaw, and roll. How to really control your suit, how to get the best work envelope, get stable react forces in microgravity. And by focusing on that, we're able to create a cadre of folks that could now go out and build this station. And so even though you can't train for everything that might break, the solar array repair that Tim mentioned, no one ever envisioned having to go out and work on a live solar array. That's just, you don't want to, 100% oxygen in your spacesuit and 100 volts of energy, they don't mix very well. Bad things can happen. Yeah. And so,
but how did you prepare for that when you knew you had to do that?
Well, so I called back on all of my training, the fundamentals of spacewalking, and then I also had to rely on a team. And so this is a theme that I'd like to talk about often, is any really great achievement is never a solitary endeavor. It's always a team of folks focusing on meeting a goal or a challenge, and so in this particular instant we had I'll back up and describe what had happened. We had relocated a large solar array truss from the top of the space station using robotics and spacewalking, and put it out at the very tip of the space station as far as you could go, and we had to bolt it all back together, made all the electrical connectors. And then folks inside on a laptop issued commands to extend these enormous solar panels. They're 110 feet in length. And one of them had a frayed guide wire. If you can imagine, like a set of leveler blinds, one of the wires had become frayed and it began to rip apart the solar array in a couple of places. And so it was impossible for us to fully extend the solar panel, nor could we retract it. It was essentially a limp noodle out there. And we had an option to either go throw away a $1 billion solar panel or figure out a way to go fix it. And it was imperative that we try to fix it because the next missions in the sequence of building the space station were European and Japanese modules. And if we didn't have the power from that solar array, there would be rolling brownouts on the space station. We wouldn't be able to do the science that we built the thing for in the first place. So, the other threat, of course, is that if we were to undock at this point, the solar panel might break apart and hit the shuttle. Of course, you probably remember the Columbia accident where part of the wing of the shuttle was damaged. So we were concerned that we might not have a safe re-entry if we didn't go out and fix this. And so people worked around the clock for 72 hours to devise a new way to get a spacewalker out on this cobbled together robotic arm, 2 different robotic systems plugged in together, 90-foot long, basically like a springboard. If you were to kind of jump up and down on it, you would really get an exciting ride.
Did you try that?
No, that Mission Control frowned upon that. And then building an entirely new set of tools to go out and do a task that we had never thought of. But by knowing and trusting the rigor in which the team in Houston was developing these procedures and trusting on my training, it actually went extremely well.
That's very interesting to hear in part too, because as a psychologist and neuroscientist, I think about internal factors that might give rise to resilience and the ability to handle those sorts of extreme circumstances. But you're really talking about this external focus almost. You're saying, I'm on the training, I'm on my team. And is that part of what makes you think someone who could do something like this, who can go into space or into extreme environments, do you think that's one of the active ingredients, one of the magic ingredients that you have to be able to succeed and do well in these environments?
Well, I think it's kind of an ingredient for success regardless of the pursuit. It's having the focus on what it is you're most passionate about by being willing to put in the time to master the craft or the fundamental knowledge that you need to do your job. But certainly for the types of things that we do in the space program, there's a lot of mechanical skills that are involved as well as cognitive, and I think that.
What about emotional skills? So when you're screened to be recruited, they must have a lot of emotional tests and stress tests they put you to. Do you have to be a person from the get-go who can remain extremely calm in the face of everything, or are you allowed to be a little bit stressed, or how tough is that assessment? Yeah.
Well, no one would ever show it, in the screening test.
Yeah, but your physiology might show it, right?
Yeah. But if we were wearing our electric EKG monitors or something, that might show in some way or form. But no, I think the types of people who are selected to become astronauts tend to have experiences in higher stress pursuits. So there are physicians and surgeons. There are fighter test pilots, people who have worked in team environments, in challenging environments, folks who have done field research, so have worked in large teams. It's getting back to that team theme. They really are not looking for the individual performer. They're looking for people that can blend well with different crews and also working with mission control because they're an essential part of the operation as well.
So, and of course you were a doctor already. You'd completed your training at the point you were recruited. Did you seek out this opportunity, or did they recruit? How did that happen? Yeah,
so my father worked on the Apollo program when I was very young, and so I had model rockets and posters on the wall, and one of my vivid memories actually was, well, a couple I'll share with you, but saw Apollo 9 launch, which was extraordinary. As a kid, I watched it from Cocoa Beach. My dad had VIP seats at the Cape, and my mom and I were just out in the waves. But I think we had a better view anyway, playing in the surf and watching the launch. But then also my dad brought home for dinner one evening one of Wernher von Braun's original German rocket scientists. Ernst Stübinger was his name, and I don't remember a word that he said, but he had a really cool German accent. And he was talking about going to the moon and Mars and all this stuff. And I thought, wow, this is something that I'd love to be a part of. And so I always kind of hoped that I could set the first boot print down on Mars. It didn't quite work out exactly that way, but I certainly don't have any complaints as to how my career turned out. So from your perspective, do you train or prepare people for managing stress and risk? What would you advise people?
You know, I'm a lab-based researcher, even though I've been trained as a clinician. And, you know, what we do is more in the mental health realm. So rather than think about training people to handle stress and, in a work environment, we think about, in my lab, we think a lot about, well, everyone has stress and everyone, has anxiety to some degree. And of course, for some of us, it goes into the clinical realm. And so and what I think is that, and a lot of people are thinking more and more about, is the way that our thoughts and our emotions are inseparable when it comes to understanding the emergence of problems like anxiety and depression. And so how can we understand what makes what is a balance between thoughts and emotions? What promotes our ability to thrive and to be productive human beings, happy human beings most of the time or some of the time? And then when does that balance go wrong, and how does it go wrong? And are there certain types of wrong in that balance that leads you down, say, the path towards anxiety, or towards the path of, becoming a sociopath, or towards, whatever the path may be. So I've really focused in on anxiety because it's such a beautiful example about how our thoughts drive this vicious cycle of anxiety. So one thing you notice in anxiety, and I don't know when you're in an extreme environment that might push you to start feeling anxious, if you've ever experienced this, but one thing that anxiety does is it distorts time. So you're no longer in this flow moment. You're on automatic pilot in this possible future where there could be something that goes wrong. There's possibly something that's going wrong, and you're worrying and you're thinking and you have this anxious apprehension. Or you're in the past, ruminating, thinking about, kind of putting all of your energy not in the present moment of what you're doing, but pulling you out to the future and the past. And so what that does is that limits your choice points. Right? You're on this automatic pilot. You have fewer resources.
Get tunnel vision.
You get tunnel vision, and you have less flexibility. And so one thing I'm really interested in are what are those types of thoughts that put you in that anxious mode versus how can we retrain those ways of thinking to increase flexibility and to loosen up that whole vicious cycle of anxiety.
Fascinating. Yeah.
One of the things I'm very interested in is something that's called the threat bias. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
So it's sort of a simple idea. It's that anxious people focus too much on the negative. So things that could possibly go wrong, things that are wrong. And so, for example, if I'm giving a talk or talking to someone, so say I'm talking to you and I say, oh, I wonder if he's interested in what I'm saying. If I had a threat bias, I'd be looking for frowns and cues, and I'd be saying, oh, is the audience interested? And I'd be I'd be very focused on that, and I'd get stuck on that. And so not only do you look for it, but then you can't disengage from the negative. And when you do that, you feel more anxious. You have fewer opportunities to find, well, actually, he is interested and he's nodding, and you don't see the good around you as much, and you feel more anxious, and then you have more of a threat bias. And so it's this really vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So in my lab, we do some very simple attention retraining techniques where in a computerized or even a mobile app context, we train people to pay attention differently, to disengage from things that are negative, like an angry human face, and to focus more on the positive, like a happy smiling face or something that's a pleasant cartoon character or something like that. And what happens is in a very simple task, if you just learn, oh, I have to follow the happy, I have to ignore this little angry face and I have to follow the happy face, your brain starts to develop a new habit. And that's all that this is as far as I'm concerned. These are habits of thinking and habits of attention. So you start to build this new habit. You're focusing on the positive, and somehow it recalibrates this whole anxious cycle. And there have been some studies showing that if you do this over, say, 4 weeks, maybe just 20 minutes a week, you can actually reduce clinical anxiety, comparable to gold standard treatments. And other studies suggest, maybe it's not the cure-all for everyone, but it's a good adjunct.
It's a tool. It's something. It's in your toolbox.
Yeah, and it increases flexibility so that you can benefit from other things. So those are, so it's those sorts of both these very basic attentional processes as well as the stories we tell ourselves and how we can start to learn to tell ourselves new stories that are less negative and more positive.
Yeah.
And then there's mindfulness, which is sort of a beautiful example, thousands and thousands year old example of this practice of letting go and being able to kind of get space and be in the moment so that you can make choices to focus more on positive.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to much of what you just said. You know, one of the ways that I've approached my life is, I call it pre-visualization, and it's something that I learned. I used to do this crazy sport called luge. It's a Winter Olympic event. Anybody's seen it? It's extraordinary. It's a high velocity, high G sport, and did a lot of stuff up in Lake Placid and elsewhere. But one of the things that we would do, you know, we could only do 4 or 5 runs a day. It's very expensive track time, and it's also kind of dangerous. And so you would get a little bit bruised up. So you'd only want to go 3 to 5 times in a day. But you would end up going down the track tenfold that number of times in your mind. And you would lay down on the start house floor, and you would actually physically go through the motions of what you're going to be experiencing on the track. And it's incredible, when you got really good at it, you would actually finish in your mind the run exactly on the time that you would actually do it in real life. Because you had the muscle memory, the visualization. You're going at up to 85 miles an hour, sometimes 6 Gs depending on the track that you're on. But you can actually visualize yourself going down the track. So the fact that you can put the rest of the world out and only visualize exceptional performance in your head, and then go out and do it, really worked for me. And I think the other part that I was going to kind of reflect on in my own life is I relate to it as kind of the Boy Scout model, but it's very daunting looking at attaining the rank of Eagle. It's a long way off. There are lots of merit badges you have to earn, and so many kids just think, I'm going to give up at this point. I want to pursue other things. But if you break down the pathway to getting an Eagle, which I did, into manageable piece parts, it's self-rewarding. You fulfill the prophecy, and you go to the next level. You get the next rank. You get the next set of merit badges. You do all the things that you need to do to achieve the rank of Eagle, or climb a big mountain, or whatever it is your goals are after. And so that for me has been a model that has seen me to various successes in life, is being able to see a summit that I want to attain, but then breaking it down into manageable parts so that I don't get discouraged along the way. Because it's very easy to listen to folks, naysayers, who will tell you that it's too long a path, or it's too hard, or why don't you try something different? And so for what
that's very interesting. So, and I'm as you were saying that too, I'm still thinking of the luge. I mean, and to be able to have such precision in what you picture, and to have the time be the same as. I'm sure you've heard heard about the concept of flow. That when you're really in that moment, in that zone, is having that habit of thinking about the physical act you're about to perform part of attaining that flow. Does that lead you into that state?
Absolutely. It's the way we would train for our missions. You train for success, but you prepare for failure as well. So it's reinforcing the fact that you're going to be successful, things are going to go well, you're going to get the job done in the best manner possible. But then it's also having the backup, knowing that I know how this piece of hardware might fail, and what I might do if it were to fail. And so having that depth of knowledge and just the confidence that you have other things in your toolkit.
But it doesn't ever feel to you like worry?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'll relate back to my last shuttle flight. It was in October, November of 2007. It was the flight that we did the solar array repair on. And we had done 3 very successful spacewalks. And so the pilot on the flight, George Zamka, would always come in right before we were closing the hatch to go depressurize the hatch. And he'd say, hey, today's going to be a great day. And he always gave us a pep talk. And we would, a fist bump and other traditions of our crew. And it was interesting, the very last spacewalk where we did the solar array repair, he came in and did the very same routine. And hey, this is going to be a great day, we're going to do awesome. And it was really lackluster that day. I really didn't know how it was going to end. I knew I would be safe.
You did feel confident about that?
I felt confident that I would not be electrocuted or injured in any way. I knew that I could protect myself, but I didn't know that we would be ultimately successful because it was completely unscripted in many ways. And so, that was the one day in my life where I have to say I had some reason for pause.
Right. Was that scarier than trying Everest for the second time after you had hurt yourself the first time?
Well, so no.
Because you had less protection on Everest.
Right. No,
in a sense.
I can talk to Ken here, or my friend Yaroslav, who's also summited Everest. You feel the elements, you feel the risk on Everest every single day. It's cold, it's hypoxic, you're malnourished, you're dehydrated. Even if you're really attentive to your body and you're really trying to stay on top of things, you're suffering each and every day there. You don't complain about it. You're excited to be there, but you slowly but surely your body is wasting away. Each season that I spent on Everest, I lost 25 pounds of lean muscle mass. So and that's with trying to consume 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day.
Oh.
That's what you need to break even up there, and you don't feel like eating that much, but you have to really work at it. So up in space, you really don't feel the threat until you're actually in the threat environment. So it's when you open up that hatch into the vacuum of space when you really have the pucker factor and realize that I'm traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, and it's 300 miles straight down.
Yeah.
So,
So what, did you always want to climb Everest, or was that after you went into space? Or what were some of, because hearing you talk about it, that doesn't sound as appealing to me as one might imagine, although I'm sure there's nothing like it on Earth. But
it's an extraordinary place.
What made you
go in
that
I'd been
direction?
climbing since I was a kid, and I started out rock climbing, and the more time you spend in the climbing community, the better you get at the craft. You look to higher and harder objectives, and you start reading. I was a voracious reader of anything to do with exploration. So all the pioneering Himalayan exploits, and of course in space, and Jacques Cousteau is another boyhood hero of mine. So really studying it, you start to think, well, I wonder if I could climb Everest. And so in actually 1994, right after I was selected to become an astronaut, I was invited to join a British medical expedition to go climb Everest. But my bosses at NASA weren't very excited about letting me break free and go climb Everest at that point. So I had to wait until 2008 for my first try. And so it was a wonderful experience in 2008. And in fact, Yaroslav, who's in the room with us tonight, was on that climb. But it was a successful climb, but not to the top. And I always define success in mountaineering as making a round trip. And that's important to, there are a lot of people who summited Everest, but they were not successful. And so you're reminded of that on a regular basis. And so I wanted to make it a round trip, and so I was at Camp 3 on the Lhotse face of Everest at 24,500 feet when I developed excruciating low back pain. It was like a dagger being jabbed into my low back, and I had to turn around. And it was devastating to me because the summit was just a day away. I could see the south summit. The true summit was just a little bit over the horizon. I was climbing extremely strong up until that point. I didn't know what was wrong with me at the time. I just knew that I was in excruciating pain, and then I had to make the mature decision not to move on and risk my own life and maybe risk the success of my teammates. Mm-hmm. But getting back to your question, after making that painful descent and coming back home, I had surgery, and I had to have a microdiscectomy to remove a nerve impingement. I went back the next year. It was still on my to-do list, and going back the second year, I had a great deal more confidence. The first time in a space flight or in a mountaineering expedition like that, there are a lot of unknowns. Will I perform well? Will I be a good teammate? Will my gear hold up? Will I make the right decisions? I knew that from 2008 that I had enough good common sense that I wouldn't jeopardize my safety or that of my teammates. And so I had a lot of knowledge, ground truth, if you will, of the environment, and I knew a lot of the people too, so that really helped.
Well, it's interesting, when I thought about all the extraordinary things you've done and the types of choices you've made in your life, I was thinking, as a psychologist, and thinking, oh, is he a sensation seeker? Is he, but what I'm realizing, about what you're saying is that you're an explorer. And because I spend so much time thinking about anxiety and and psychopathology, and also because I'm a developmentalist.
I think she just called me a psychopath, but I'm
not
sure.
Yes. Although the current term is sociopath. So.
Okay, all right, sociopath. Okay.
But I think a lot about what can go wrong, and even though I study resilience, just hearing you speak really makes me think about, well, there are a lot of adverse conditions, and there are a lot of people who reach some of their full potential under adverse conditions. And it seems like this is something that you've really experienced in your life, and that you've been, in a way, you're surmounting all of those challenges. It must be an incredibly fulfilling experience to do.
Well, I do enjoy challenge, and I study it, intently. I try and prepare myself to the fullest of my ability, and I'm in my element for sure. I'm in the zone when I'm in environments that are known and comfortable to me. So the vacuum of space is comfortable to me, as is the summit of Everest, but down below...
Is it finding your zone? I mean, I actually used to be a classical musician, the oboe of all instruments that I played a lifetime ago, but and I just remember some of my greatest moments, and what really motivated me to be a musician was finding those moments of flow. Is that part of what's happening for you as well here?
Yeah, absolutely. The beauty of being out on a spacewalk and moving gracefully in 6 degrees of freedom of motion, and to be as efficient as possible, to not over control, to change your orientation to get the perfect reach. It's just a really intense human experience. And then, of course, every once in a while you look up and there are the Himalayas, or there's the Bahamas, or the Great Barrier Reef. And so it's just, I've described it as a Shirley MacLaine out-of-body experience. But, it's...
but it's a transcendence.
Yes. Yeah.
And those are big moments of transcendence. Are there things that you have in your daily life, maybe your medical practice, maybe other things where you find the small moments of transcendence? Is that how you experience it?
I do. I think, when you can look at yourself in the mirror and say that I've done something difficult well. And there are a lot of things that in our daily lives that we don't like to do, but in the final analysis, if you've done it well and you've supported other people, what have you, worked well with other people, that is really rewarding. Yeah. So I have a question for you. You talked about there's one approach to risk, which is a path through fluidity and knowledge, and then there's just pure risk, assumption of risk. The Evel Knievel. Have you studied those types of the true daredevil, and how does their psyche differ from?
That it's interesting. That I haven't per se studied Evel Knievels, but what I have been very interested in children is what we would call surgency, or temperamental approach. Kids that are in temperament we have the building blocks for personality, and a lot of it's motivational. So a lot of it's, well, what motivates a kid in this world? And a very basic distinction is, do punishments motivate you, or do rewards motivate you? So when you think about the folks who can go on and become that Evel Knievel, they have to be very reward focused. And in our culture in particular, we think of that as a very good thing. Oh, they want to achieve. They're going towards they're going for the goal. And it is a very good thing. And there's always a flip side to every good thing. So that you do see some kids who, can't put brakes on that. Yeah. And then they become, the kids who are easily frustrated, who have anger problems, who are impulsive, who maybe, and there's a very, developmentalists have thought a lot about how that can also be a road towards attention deficit, because of this sort of this focus on what you want and not being able to inhibit that in a way that allows you to do what you need to do in life. Right. So I've thought a lot about that, and it's funny too. You study you know, as a scientist, you study things, and it's interesting, in a way you've studied yourself, perhaps, too, I don't know, in some ways. I don't know. But you study things, and you have all this knowledge, and then you know, do something crazy like have kids, and then you realize, and when you're a psychologist, you realize, so I have a son and a daughter, and my daughter...
So do I.
And, right? And it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. And my husband is right there, so he can speak to this. Our 2-year-old daughter is very reward-focused and very driven, which I love about her. And as someone who wants to promote that, especially in a young woman, and to you know, make sure she always feels that she can go for what she wants to and empower her, you know, how do I find the balance for her and give her the sorts of tools to, you know, use her thoughts in a productive way, to use those emotions in a productive way, and not let them get in her way. So I think a lot about that, both in my research and in my family.
Well, yeah, it's definitely interconvertible. Yeah, one of the things I've found in my life, you know, I've set my sights on a variety of goals, and not always have I achieved the summit. You know, not always have I reached the goal, but the very fact that I've set out on that pathway, you know, there are twists and turns along the course, but, you know, doors that open up for you that you can't even imagine as you take your first step. And, you know, opportunity, the fact that you've tried and you've put your best foot forward really, you know, is an extraordinary tool for anyone who's, you know, heading off on any path. And so one story I'll get back to luge is, you know, I was training for the 1988 Winter Olympic Games in Calgary, Canada, and I competed in the Olympic trials, didn't quite make the U.S. team, but a total curveball came my way. A friend of mine from the Philippines, which of course is a Winter Olympic powerhouse, was looking for a coach, and he's a good friend of mine, Ray Ocampo, and I ended up being the chef de mission and the head coach for the Philippine Olympic team. And so I walked in opening ceremonies. I lived in the Olympic Village for the Olympic Games. And so that's one of the most incredible life experiences that I can, you know, think about. You know,
it's such a testament to, you know, you walk through one door, you don't consider anything a limitation, and you keep walking through. One thing I did, this is a bit of a segue, but one thing I did want to ask you about is some of the research that you've done. You study the physiology of how people adapt to extreme situations. So is this, you know, going to the Arctic, going to the, you know, what sorts of questions are you interested in?
Well, so I've done a lot of work in space physiology and high altitude physiology. But my current job, actually, I work in support of the National Science Foundation's U.S. Antarctic program. So I oversee the screening and real-time health care of U.S. Antarctic participants. And so it's an extreme environment. And in fact, right now, they've just closed the stations for the winter. And so some of these folks live on the ice for 9 to 10 months without any possibility of medical evacuation. They're there. There's no plane coming in or out. And so they're rather extraordinary people. I quite honestly, you know, it's kind of like, you know, wintering at South Pole would be like going into a cave for a couple of weeks for me. I'm not sure I could do it.
Yeah, the claustrophobia. I mean, so what are the tricks to be resilient to that sort of a...
So we do psychological screening, of course, but there's a certain personality type that really, they're very adventure seeking. They're oftentimes very worldly. They love to travel, so they'll work a season on the ice and then spend the next 5 months traveling around the world, and they'll come back for another season.
So they can take it because
they've got their reward. Their gold ring is at the end of the season when they can go, you know, go travel the world. But also, I think they really enjoy the camaraderie, the intensity of the community. There are 40 or so people at South Pole Station in the middle of the winter. They become very close. As a group, they're dependent, literally dependent on one another. You know, you've got to have the power plant running at all times, and the food production and the medical clinic and all of this going. So it's a really interesting dynamic that I think you'd probably find.
Yeah. Do they ever become anxious, or are they so well selected to be resilient against? Because, you know, it's a type of person who maybe there are certain risk factors, and maybe these folks don't have those risk factors towards anxiety.
Well, the screening isn't perfect, and so and the challenges of the seasons, you know, vary from year to year. The dynamics
guess more
of the group.
depression though than anxiety.
Yeah, I think it's called seasonal affective disorder, and you know, the darkness, 24 hours a day. The long winter's night is basically, you know, 7 or 8 months long. It's a beautiful night. There are aurora. You go outside. It may be 100 degrees below zero, but it's really beautiful. And so there are unique perks that they have there, but certainly
what do they
challenges.
look for to exclude people? Do they look for specific personality factors? Maybe folks would be drawn to that but would not be a good fit?
Well, I think just general mental health criteria. So they use tools called the MMPI.
They use the MMPI.
Yeah, and then there's a psychological interview that takes place to make sure that they'll do okay.
So they make sure they're not sociopaths speaking.
Right, yes. I guess I couldn't go. Yeah.
The MMPI is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I wasn't sure what the acronym stood for, so I used the acronym.
That was a funny measure, actually. They developed that back in the 40s or 50s, and the way they did it is they took diagnosed groups of people and they asked them tons of random questions, like, do you read mechanic magazines? Do you read, really random stuff? And then they just followed the data and said, well, what are the sociopaths like? What are the depressed people like? What are the extroverts like?
Wow.
And that's how they developed that measure.
Fascinating. I didn't realize that.
Sometimes when you apply to, especially Minnesota, where they develop the measure, if you apply to clinical psychology PhD programs, they make you take that as well. Although I think they like a little sociopathy. I think they want just the right amount. Well, I don't know how we got into sociopaths, but I do have. There is something about, and I wonder if you've run into some sociopaths in the world that you've, in the choices you've made, because one thing that is characteristic of a sociopath is that they're not as reactive to upsetting or threatening or things that usually make people afraid. They don't react to it. So they have this much lower, they have a higher threshold before they feel much. And that's part of the problem. So have you ever run into
I can't say that I have
directly,
or at least that I recognize it, although I have been on Everest. Everest is so popular now, and unfortunately it's too popular, and they've opened the floodgates. It's a money-making opportunity for Nepal, of course. The more permits, and bringing in more climbers is great for the economy. I think they're getting better. I think they've retrenched a little bit and doing a better job screening folks that want to go climb Everest. But I remember in the Khumbu Icefall one time, meeting up with a Bolivian climber who was trying to descend one of the most objective hazards of the climb in this Khumbu Icefall, rappelling 150 feet down an ice sheet. And I had to teach him how to rappel. And so there are outfitters out there who will, or at least at the time, would take people into really harm's way. And so I wonder if in this particular situation, this is someone who was fearless, didn't recognize his limitations, and I don't think he ever went back up. He was terrified, and I think that was the end of his climb.
What a tricky balance, though, because you're also such a beautiful example of nothing's impossible, but yet when it's not. You've made, as you said, mature choices. That that's an incredibly hard balance to achieve, I would imagine.
Well, I think knowing one's limitations is to study first and foremost, and then to build up your skills. Don't go straight to Everest. Start at the rock gym down the street and kind of prepare yourself. But
Did you? Where do you think you learned that? I mean, I'm a developmentalist too, so I'm interested. What experiences in your life do you think?
Well, I was just talking with my wife the other day about my parents, and just in retrospect, they were really cool.
That's what we all hope our kids say one day.
Well, no, I was talking about my son, who he doesn't think I'm the village idiot, but he's a teenager, and so I'm certainly a lot less cool than I once was. And,
what does it take?
Yeah. I don't know, but. It gave me cold sweats, quite honestly. I thought it was a very powerful film, and if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend it. I'm voting for it for Academy Award if I had a vote. But as an astronaut and as a scientist and engineer, there are certain things where you have to suspend disbelief, and so it's a really, really, really bad day that Sandra has in George. It didn't turn out very well for George either, actually. But I was really amazed at the quality of the film, the visuals, the vibrancy of the Earth below, actually the fidelity of the representation of the spacesuits and the capsules and the space station, the general movement in space. It's very difficult to capture on film. The movie Apollo 13 actually used parabolic flight, and Tom Hanks and the crew, they actually were in zero G when they filmed that movie, certain scenes of the film. So I thought that their approach to suspending disbelief was really focused on getting much of it as close to real life as possible. I thought the fear that Sandra and George displayed in that film was very situationally appropriate, and far beyond anything that I've faced in my life. Hope to never face anything like that as well. Thank you. I was aboard a mission called STS-86, and it was right after a really rough time in the Russian space program history. There had been a fire aboard the space station, and there had also been a collision of a resupply ship to the outside of the station. And so I was assigned to this flight as the lead spacewalker, and we had a spacewalk to go collect some experiments on the outside of the station, but also to deliver some special spacewalking hardware to the outside of the station so that they could potentially patch a leak in the spacecraft, which unfortunately they weren't able to do. But it had been a really rough 6 months aboard the station, and because of all the failures that they had, there was a major power down. And I remember floating into the station, and it was very dark and mildewy, and I thought to myself, I'm really excited to be here, but I'm glad I'm not going to live here for the next 4.5 months, I think it was a real testament to the Russian space program that they were able to recover from that. It's not like you can go and find resupplies for the avionics that just broke. You've got to take apart something that you no longer need, and you strip the wires and cobble together a solution based on the things that you have at hand. And they were masters at that. And I think they took really incredible pride in what they're able to do. The station, I think, was designed for 10 years of life, and they kept it on orbit for perhaps 16 or 17 years by the time it was said and done. So really resourceful, MacGyver type folks that were working up there. Yeah.
I've had a strange road, perhaps. I'll keep it brief, but I did, as I mentioned, start out as a classical musician. So I was at conservatory, I was at the Eastman School of Music playing the oboe. And I was going to be, and I trained since I was 9 years old to be, and no double reed was too challenging for me. I was going to do it. And then I fell in love with psychology in a very odd way. I was so Eastman is at the University of Rochester. So I was able to just take courses there, and I took, in addition to Sanskrit, wow. True story, wow. and Islamic mysticism, I also took some psychology courses. And I volunteered at a center where they did research with abused children and children who had suffered amazing adversity, and so many of them were resilient. It was a research center, and I was sort of as a lowly undergrad, I was sort of on the ground floor and just doing more of the assisting, but I got to work with some of these remarkable children, and I kind of fell in love with them, I think, and I think that inspired me to wonder, well, what in the world allowed them to overcome things that I hadn't even imagined could happen to children. And I think that was at the heart of my inspiration. And almost on a dime in my junior year, after my junior recital at Eastman, I announced that I was switching my major. And in retrospect, I kind of can't believe it, but, and then I thought I was going to be a clinician, and I would work with kids, and then as my education went on, I fell in love with research, and I realized, I love working with kids, I love working with people, but all of my creative energy perhaps, that had been focused on being a musician and an artist. And actually, I hated science, I hated technology, all of it. I was a very artsy-fartsy kind of the whole thing. But I fell in love with science, and my creative energy was there. And so then, science became my tool to ask questions that I was fascinated about. That's a great question. I mean, so there is a lot of anxiety around uncertainty in both, in those of us who feel stressed, but also those of us who are clinically anxious. And it's sort of a combination of the bottom up and the top down. So the bottom up are these habits that we have of how we think about the world, how we pay attention. And then the more top down aspect of it is the stories we tell ourselves. So, we have a narrative, really, to put it simply. We have a personal narrative of what our life is, what's possible in our life. And when you start to try to heal the anxious mind, I think you really go at it from both levels. And so, cognitive approaches, so cognitive behavioral therapy, many of you may know, is one of the gold standard approaches to helping folks who are anxious. And really it combines this, create some new habits of attention and learn to tell a new story about your present and your future. And we're increasingly finding out that mindfulness and really, traditional meditation and relaxation techniques are also some of the most powerful tools for healing an anxious mind, because, again, it brings you to the present. And it helps break this habit of being in this anxious future or this ruminative past. So I think that's where the cutting edge, both the research and the treatment is right now.
My spacewalk, for example, I described it at a high level, but that solar ray repair EVA where I was anxious, quite honestly, I focused on the things that I could control, the fundamentals of performance, and then trying to visualize that, okay, the next thing I have to do is this step, cut out the frayed guide wire, step at a time, and visualizing.
Well, it's remarkable because, a lot of us have an intolerance for uncertainty. And I think you're a person who has a remarkable level of being able to adapt to it. So there's uncertainty, but you're approaching it. You don't shrink from it. You approach it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think I am very mechanical by nature. Some of my fondest memories growing up were working with my dad, building furniture and fixing things around the house. So, that engineering part of my brain is probably revved up a little bit. But no, I think we always excel at the things that we enjoy the most. You can try and be a great writer. You can force yourself to be a great writer, but if it isn't your passion, you probably only become mediocre at it. And pick a skill. I've chosen things that I really enjoy and have some general aptitude for. And so the things that I read about, and the things as a young boy, and the things that I enjoyed doing, all had to do with exploration. Jacques Cousteau, unveiling the coral reefs, and Mallory and Irvine, climbing in the Himalayas. They were scientists, explorers, but they also, were out there personally, taking it all in, and so perhaps some of that stems from the fact that my folks were so adventurous, and travel was a part of our life.
Well, one of the first words you mentioned as we started talking was mastery.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the most powerful motivating factors, one would argue, in human psychology. So really, you've described a lot of mastery. It's an immediate physiological and subjective reaction to a known threat. And that's very different from anxiety, because anxiety is not in reaction to an immediate, real threat. It's about apprehension for something that could be a threat. So there's a very important distinction there. So if someone like Dr. Parazynski feels very confident about his training and his team, you probably wouldn't have felt fear so much as anxiety, because you felt safe in that moment. There was not an immediate, threat to your well-being, even though in reality there might, in the, everything's possible. But.
Well, it's an interesting question because the target of our fears may not be the same. You might look at a situation and define the target of fear as something very different from myself. So I didn't consider the solar array repair and my personal safety as a target of my fear. What I feared most actually was failure, actually. And so the 72-hour evolution of coming up with a solution on the ground and getting all the procedures up to us and defining the robotic trajectory that had to be flown was very difficult. Everything up until the point of the final elements of the repair had gone flawlessly. And so it was then upon my shoulders to do the last little bit. And so that was my biggest fear, is that everybody else had done their job and that I might screw up. And so I don't know if that answers directly your question, but I think everybody approaches challenging environments in different ways. We see objective hazards in different ways. Well, that's a very powerful question, and I would say for each and every person who's seen their home planet from space, it's the most profound human experience I can think of. It's a perspective that you can see in an IMAX movie, you can see something on the web, but until you can actually see it in 3 dimensions, to be floating there and see it with your own eyes, to see a sunrise, the sun come up from behind the Earth limb in about 30 seconds and see the full spectrum of light explode in front of your eyes, and to see the northern or southern lights from that perspective. Again, it's this out-of-body experience. It's really gives you great perspective. And I think at a minimum, the experience of spaceflight brings everyone back home an environmentalist at a minimum. You realize how paper thin the Earth's atmosphere is, and how incredibly gorgeous, and how the mind's eye always draws you back to planet Earth. Looking out into the distant heavens is really extraordinary as well. You can see trillions and trillions of stars. Carl Sagan talked about billions and billions. You can actually see a lot more up there. But your eye is always drawn back to this beautiful blue planet beneath you. And so some people have had very religious transformations. Edgar Mitchell on his way to the moon had a very profound experience. I for one just have this incredible appreciation for the gift of life, and trying to I describe it as now that I've had this gift of space flight, trying to earn the oxygen that I breathe, to pay back a little bit, because I really am very fortunate. And I guess one of the things that I would plug for everyone in the room, we live in exciting times. One might look at the NASA programs right now and think that things are on the decline, or we don't really have a strong space program. We're in a time of transition, and transition is uncomfortable, certainly. I think within the next few years, we will start to really branch out and hopefully get to Mars, get human explorers to Mars. But closer to home, there are a number of companies that are looking to open up cosmos for all of us, commercial human spaceflight. And so companies like Virgin Galactic and SpaceX and Sierra Nevada and others are going to not only be taking NASA astronauts into low Earth orbit, but paying customers, tourists. And it's going to change everything. And I'd imagine in another 20 or 30 years, all of us on this planet will be astronauts. Instead of taking a jetliner from New York to Tokyo, we'll get on a space liner and we'll be there in 50 minutes instead of 14 hours. So it's very exciting to think about the fact that we're going to become a spacefaring planet very soon.